Let's look at how to start an Amazon EC2 instance. An EC2 instance is like a virtual machine, like you might have with VirtualBox. It's just a regular OS, like Linux or Windows, running fresh, your root. You have control of the entire virtual machine. And also, like something like VirtualBox, you can decide how much performance it has, like how much memory and how many CPU cores, how much disk space. You can start and stop it. You can make snapshots and so forth. So on the AWS console, you would go to Services, EC2 under Compute. This is kind of the dashboard. So in summary, how many instances you have running, how many you have not running, like in total. Volumes are the disks that, like the hard drive basically for the instance. Key pairs are how you access the instances. Security groups are like the networking setup, like the firewalls. Elastic IPs if you want to associate a static IP with your instances. Even if the instance starts and stops or changes, it can keep a certain IP address. And snapshots for backups. So you would go, if you want to launch a new one, you can click here, Launch, or you can go to Instances and Launch. Now you get to choose the AMI, so the Amazon Machine Image. These are installs of Linux or Windows that already have certain packages installed. So let me zoom in here. The common one that people would use when they just, if they don't have a specific use case, be Amazon Linux 2. It's got GCC so you can compile stuff. It's got typical packages that you might find on a regular Linux installation. And of course, you can install more once you log on. Interestingly, macOS is starting to become available. And then there's various other kinds of enterprise Linux. These are kinds of Linux that companies would be looking into or probably already have on their servers. So these come with support, like you can pay Red Hat, which is now IBM, to provide support for these. And then Ubuntu, likewise, you can get enterprise support. Then you have some Windows versions, and there are some setups, some certain AMIs that have very specific software installed for very specific purposes, like TensorFlow, CUDA for use of GPU, and so forth. So of course, when we do the next step of the type of instance, if you're going to use this, you'd probably choose a type that has a GPU. And varieties of Windows Server, specifically with SQL Server for a database, and just more variations of those ideas. Of course, you can create your own and then save it, and those would be my AMIs. Or you can go to the marketplace and find ones that companies created with specific software that for specific purposes like firewalls or virus scanning or whatever. And these you would pay differently for. There's actually quite a few available. Anyway, I'll go with the typical Linux 2 from Amazon. Now you have to choose the instance type, and there are a lot of instance types. So to get some ideas about this, there's a page, Instant Types, and you can see there's these major categories: Mac, the T, the M, and A, and C, and R, and so forth. So the T's, these are called general purpose because they're not really optimized for any specific kind of use cases. The T's are the burstable ones. So these are probably about the cheapest ones, but they also don't give a consistent high performance. They'll throttle pretty quickly. And I've graphed this before where after about 30 minutes, it throttled significantly and got about 10% CPU usage after that. So it's cheaper, but you have to be aware of that difference. It's fine for a website, but not good if you're doing data processing. Then others are compute optimized. So they have better processors, and they're not going to throttle, of course. And you can see what their features are. So for example, these specific processors, and how many virtual cores, and how much memory for all the different types of instances. Some have more memory. And some will have GPUs like Tesla GPUs, 8 gigs of memory each, or 32 gigs or whatever. How many GPUs? 8 each, but if you want 4 GPUs, then you can get this instance. There's also an instance explorer on this menu. So there you can kind of drill down to what you're looking for. So if you want like storage optimized and GPU for some reason, I guess there are none that do both of those. We'll do memory or compute optimized plus, no. I wonder what category. Maybe it's just, this is just GPU. It's a compute memory accelerated. Oh, it's called accelerated. Okay, so here's the GPU ones. If you're really specific about an Intel processor and compute optimized, you can do it like this. They all have their different pricing. There's different kinds of pricing, first of all, depending on how you choose your instance. If it's on demand, which is what we're doing, then it's one fee structure. Spot instances let you say that you don't really care when it starts and stops, and so you can save a lot of money that way. The savings plan, if you're planning ahead, you know you're going to use these for a year plus. Likewise reserved. Or you can literally get the whole physical server to yourself. No one else is sharing it as a virtual machine. So that would be for the best possible performance. And for the specific pricing, so here's on-demand pricing. Linux versus Red Hat versus SUSE Linux, and so forth. The different machine types are shown, and you see that there are price per hour, even though technically it's per second billing. So you have to pay for at least a minute, but then after that it's per second. So they do take time to start up, but otherwise the operations are pretty quick. So if you're going to shut it down, it's going to be pretty close to instantaneous. So you're not going to spend too many seconds doing something like that. So you can kind of really start and stop these exactly when they're needed, if that's your workflow. So you would look at the per hour, and then you can compute per second. So obviously the ones that are more capable are going to be a lot more expensive, like significantly more expensive. You could go from about $10 a month to have one running the whole month, or they have a free tier also. This T2 small or micro is free if you only have one of them in your first year of using Amazon. But regardless of that, you can spend about $10 a month, all the way up to thousands a month for a machine. And places like or companies like Uber are spending millions of dollars a month on Amazon because they have thousands or tens of thousands of these servers. Netflix too, I believe. So it's huge business, but it can get down to second level pricing per second. So we're going to do the T2 micro just because it's good enough, but it's whatever you want. So be careful, choose wisely. Then you say configure. How many do you want? I think you can get 20 at a time, or 10 or 20, but then you'll be capped out. But as you use Amazon longer, you'll get more, or you can request more. You can do spot instances if you want, if you don't really care when it starts and stops. You also want to turn on public IP because you want to access this machine from your own machine. Now, like Uber, for example, or Netflix would be creating a bunch of cloud instances that are not public. They only talk to each other. You can make a virtual private network inside the data center, So all your machines only talk to each other. But that would be more for like some sort of processing job, like Netflix processing the video so it's at different levels of quality, for example. But we want a machine we can access directly. So we're going to want a public IP. So make sure you turn that on. If you don't turn it on here, you can make an elastic IP where you give it a IP that doesn't change, and you can associate it to the running instance. But you do pay for that too. It's a very small amount, but it's still a cost to have a static IP. So we'll just do it this way. Most of the stuff we don't care about. We're not doing reserved. We're not going to join a Windows directory. We're not going to do this. This is where if you need this machine to talk to other services like a database on Amazon or other machines, then you would do an IAM role. So the machine is authenticated to those other machines. We don't really need CPU options, but you can make specific choices here. Threads per core. Actually not for a T2, I guess. T2 micro. You don't have those options, but for a different machine type, presumably you would have those options. When you shut it down, should it delete itself, which is a terminate, or should it just stop, in which case you're paying for the disk space, but that's very cheap, a couple dollars a month. Monitoring, you can see details about how it's CPU usage and memory usage and so forth. But most of the stuff we're not going to need. Typical network interface, you don't need multiple ones for our cases. And we don't need any special metadata. We also don't need tags. But before tags, actually storage. So how much disk space? So if you're going to install a lot of software or store a lot of files, you might want to change this number. You can choose what kind of disk it is for different kinds of speed. See, these numbers are changing. This is fine. And whether you've encrypted it or not. So you can encrypt with Amazon keys. They can make the key, or you give your own key, in which case they'll never be able to read your data. I mean, that's not true for EC2, for like Dynamo or something. You can make it so Amazon can't read the data either. You can add multiple volumes, but one should be fine for us. We don't have any tags. This is just to categorize things. Security group, so this is important because you're going to want to access your machine through certain ports like SSH. So you can add rules and give the port range and which, so anyone can access it, or my current IP only could access it. That might be convenient for you for security purposes, or make a specific IP range. We'll say anywhere. It says, hey, that's, it's public, so be aware. So bots can try to access our machine now through SSH. Or you can configure a security group and save it. So here's one for HTTP and SSH. I gave it this name. And it turns on these ports for everybody. So we'll do that. Just make sure you got port 22 because you're going to want to access the machine through SSH. So then you review it, and we see that it's got all our settings. And it says, hey, it's open to the world through certain ports, specifically things like port 80. But that's what we want. So then we'll launch it. Now, we need a way to access it, and they're not going to do passwords for us because that's not as secure as keys. So it's going to make an SSH key. Now, if you've already got an SSH key, you can choose it, or you can have them make a new one right now. So we'll make a new one. And when you click download, you got to save it somewhere. It's a PM file, which is the public and private key together. And this is your one chance to download it. You click this and you can download it, and you're not going to be able to download it again. So catch it at this point. Or you can make your own and upload it. All right, so there's my key. Private. Oh, actually, yeah, the public is on the server. It gave me the private key. And we can go back to EC2 here. We can see that it's not quite running yet. It's still pending, so it's still starting up. If we click it, we'll see, okay, now it's running actually. You can click refresh to see any changes. It's been running for 1 minute, so I've paid for 1 minute. And here's all the stats about it. You can stop it, which means you could restart it again. It'll just boot up like a regular computer. You can reboot it right now, or you can terminate it, which will delete it. And whatever data you have will be gone. So to connect, you can click connect, but you could also just grab the IP from the other page. This is the IP, and this is the username. This username has been established by the AMI. Amazon configured that AMI, but whoever's AMI you use, you want to see what the username is here, and use that with SSH. So let's give the key name and then EC2 user. That's our public IP. Oh, when I saved the file, I didn't have the right permissions. Make sure it's 444 read only. Otherwise, SSH will refuse to use it because it's private. Oh, should be, the world should not be able to read it, only me. So, like something like that. I made it too specific, actually. To the wrong order. That means I can read it, no one else. So I've logged into the machine, and you see by running uptime, it's been up for 1 minute. I'm the only person who's logged on, and I can do things like it says I can do an update of the packages, or update, yeah, I think that actually updates the packages. So I do have sudo access, which means I don't need to log in as root, right? So you'll never log in as root. There's some updates, probably security fixes, so it's good to have. And then you can do things like install Python 3. Is this okay? Yes. And so forth. So now you can run Python 3 commands. All right, so this is my own personal server. I can just leave it running as long as I want it. Or I can get out of it and go back to all the instances. Yeah, now it's one of them is running, and see it here. You can also look at your key pairs. So remember, I just made this one, but all you can do is look at the fingerprint. You can't get it again. You can't get the private key again. So that was your one chance before. You can look at the volumes, see what they're attached to. These are like the disks. That's not the one I just launched. It's this one that I just launched. So you can open that up and make sure it's the right one. Yep. And from here, actions, you can create a snapshot, and then let's see what happens actually. Let's create a snapshot. You'll pay for the storage of this snapshot, but again, it's cheap. Okay. This is the request. It's pending. Of course, it takes a little bit of time to make a snapshot. And so you can restore it, but I've not done all these options. Presumably create image would let you create an AMI. So you can configure, I believe this is how it works. I think you can configure your system, like install Python, whatever you got to do, and then snapshot it and make an AMI, and then you can launch more EC2 instances of that type. Let's just find out real fast. We'll create an image. So I won't proceed with this, but it looks like, yeah, you're choosing all the options to launch a new instance with exactly the same files and configuration that I've done with the machine I started up. Okay, I want to delete that snapshot so I don't pay for it, so I'm going to delete the snapshot. And is there anything else important? Not at this time. So on the next video, I'll show you how to do all this through the command line.